Okay. Did you say that you already had the stream going? Okay. Can you see the board over there? The whiteboard? Okay. Cool. Alrighty. Welcome, everyone. I'm Elias Brinkman, or you can call me Eli. I'm going to be talking about the technical interview, which is something that has. So the T2 people here, have you done any practice like mock technical interviews yet? Okay, cool. So that's something that I believe that you'll still be doing as part of even the new curriculum, with part of with Megan and Clint and all that. Basically, a technical interview is going to test your basic knowledge. They can come in a bunch of different formats and different types of exercises. They can be whiteboarding exercises. That's typically what we're going to practice here. And including I want to have a little activity in this presentation. They can be take-home assignments. That's not something that I think that we really do here, but that's something that they might also do depending on where you're interviewing with. It can be a pair programming session. That's maybe also kind of like here because I'm going to be talking with you and helping out, and we'll be going back and forth. It could be really whatever the company, the organization wants it to be. And it's something, a technical interview can be something a lot of people really worry about, that they really fret over. And really you just want to prepare for it by reviewing everything that you've already learned so far, because there can be a big difference between having learned something and really knowing it. I think that if you're able to explain it, if it can just come out of your brain really easily, without having to really research it first, that's a really good first step. Obviously, I think it's a big ask, especially for us at Atlas right now, to be reviewing on top of the current coursework. So if you're starting with something that you're passionate about, something that you're already interested in, if you're thinking this is something that I want to learn more about, then that's a great place to start. And maybe just other topics that you think you have a weak spot in. Another thing is to just talk about your code with others, and talk about code in general, not just your code. Just building up that muscle, that ability to be able to speak and not just write and think about code. And another step up from that is doing sort of a mock interview with your peers. Obviously, we'll be doing it here as part of the Atlas curriculum. And a big part of practicing is going to be LeetCode. And that can be LeetCode specifically, can be HackerRank or Code Wars. Basically just code challenges. And it's definitely a valuable resource, but maybe not the only thing that you should be relying on. So LeetCode is great for data structures and algorithms, these very technical, narrow scope sort of code puzzles that you want to solve. It's not necessarily going to practicing these isn't necessarily going to teach you about frameworks or language syntax or something like that. But it's a great way to develop these patterns for specific, again, data structures and algorithms. And that might not be always relevant depending on what specific job you're going into, but these technical interviews very often draw on these specific kinds of questions that LeetCode, Code Wars are using. Another thing that you want to do is to practice pseudocoding, which is just writing out your code, not in very specific terms, using maybe just coding, but without the specific language syntax, things like that. The ideas rather than the specific, what you want the code to do rather than what the code is actually doing. Also, when it comes to LeetCode, code, you want to challenge yourself, but you don't want to just like slam your head against the wall. Like, if you don't understand something after a while, like look it up if you don't understand it. And of course, like I said, I think you should augment your study with research into like the tech stack, the framework, and you can tailor that specifically to like whatever company that you're looking at. If you're trying to interview for a specific company, then you want to look at like what they're using and researching based on what they're using. Okay, so when it comes to actually doing an interview, it's really all about like what you're talking about, like how you're composing yourself during the interview, and not just like what you're writing. If you don't know how to, like, you're going to be getting a problem basically. And if you don't know how to immediately solve that problem, that's like totally normal. You want to just like basically just take that problem and say, okay, this is trying to do X, Y, and Z. And I think that to do that, I need to do A, B, C, D, E, F, L, M, N, O, P. You know, you're trying to just talk through it. And the more that you're like actually vocalizing, you're like maybe writing down, whatever you're doing, you're communicating with your interviewer that you are thinking, however you are, that you're thinking about this problem out loud. That's like what they're looking for. They're looking for your problem solving, and that's like just as important, if not more important, than actually solving it. So if you were to just open up the problem and you just like coded up the problem and didn't say a word, versus if you opened up the problem and you talked about your entire process and say you didn't even solve it, but you like really communicated every step of what you were thinking, you might be more likely to get the job in that scenario. And you can also talk with the interviewer. They're not necessarily going to be like the antagonist in this situation. Like obviously they're trying to like get the best out of you. And so like you can ask them questions, you can get clarification on the question. You can ask them if you can use Google, you can ask them anything you want. You can be like, oh, well, I'm not sure about this. Should I use X or Y? Like, you know, even if it's something that you just like literally don't know, you can like ask questions because you want to like further yourself along. You don't want to just get stuck sitting on one spot, not really sure what to do. Okay, so I thought I would start with just like a really simple, maybe not like totally nothing burger, but like a pretty simple question, doing FizzBuzz. Do one of y'all T2s want to come up and help code this with me? So basically we'll be doing this like together, regardless of who comes and writes on the board. We're okay, cool. Let me first open up the parameters here, and you can look at these first. So are y'all familiar with FizzBuzz at all? Does that like name mean anything to you?
It does. Yeah, I remember the name, and I vaguely remember like what it's about.
Okay, so just for reference, like I'll go through it real quick. So we're gonna like have an integer in, like just some number as an input, and that's gonna be like our upper bound. We're going to want to return a string array with its one indexed, where every time the answer is divisible by 3 and 5, it should print FizzBuzz. Whenever it is divisible by 3, it should be fizz. Whenever it's divisible by 5, it should be buzz. And otherwise, it should be saved as a string, just the number, whatever it was. So if it's like, 1 to 100, it should be, here, let me show the example. It should be, in this case, it's 1 to 15. Every number that is not divisible by 3 or 5 is just the number. Every number that's divisible by 3 is fizz. Every number that's divisible by 5 is buzz. Every number that's divisible by both is FizzBuzz. So how would we start thinking about that? So how would we just like approach this problem? Like if we're trying to make a function that can return a string array, what is like the first and do we want to use like Python or just like generally, how do we want to think about this?
So the way I remember uses if-else statements.
Okay. If else. Okay. So what do you want to say about that? Do you want to write any?
I guess I'm just gonna write what's in my head, and
Yeah,
I'm
write it out.
I'm missing something.
And anyone else can help out too.
Well, you have 15, so you're going to be iterating through the 15 letters, so you have a for loop. With the
Okay.
iteration, the i's or whatever.
So we're looping through.
And then you have if divisible by 3 and 5
I guess
is buzz.
the load. That's the divisible sign, right?
That's I mean, you're off to a good start, yeah.
Three.
And this is asking for a lot, I know, because this is really putting you on the spot.
Something like that.
Okay. So basically, if it's divisible by 3 and 5, print fizzbuzz. Okay. Then what else do we want to happen? What are the other?
Then you just. Or would it be?
Yeah.
Yeah. Another else if.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And then is it just else at the end?
Yeah, else.
All right. I think that that's pretty good pseudocode, honestly. You can sit down if you want. I think that's a pretty good start. All right. Okay. So what are like some other considerations that we might want to think about given these parameters? Specifically, like with our else statement, because we're going through some numbers. I know this is still pseudocode, but like we want to always make sure that the number printed out is a string. So what might we need to do for that? Okay, maybe yeah, like print it as a string. We could like cast it as a string, and depending on what language that we're using, we can use like if it's Python, it would be like str, do the this would be like stri, or if this were JavaScript, it would be like I dot to string. I think one thing that you did happen to catch on to is that we are starting out with the fizzbuzz scenario, as in we didn't start out with fizz and then buzz and then fizzbuzz. If we had started out with just fizz and then fizzbuzz down here, we would have, any time that we wanted to catch both a multiple of 3 and 5, it would have seen 3 right away. And if it was, say, 15, which would have been a multiple of 3 and 5, it would have seen the 3 first and just printed out fizz. It would have just printed out fizz, even though it should have been fizz buzz. So I think that's, whether like totally intentional or not, that's like definitely the way to go about it. I'm gonna give the benefit of the doubt. And how would we maybe go about this if we wanted to, say, add in like another term for like, or if we wanted to change, let's see, how could we make this more complicated? Say for every multiple of 2, sure. Yeah, we wanted to print Baz. How would we do that? Could we just... Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think one issue, if we just added it to the bottom, if it's every multiple of 2, we're going to run into a lot of scenarios where it's a multiple of like 3 and 2, or 5 and 2, or 3 and 5 and 2. So what's something that we could maybe do to... This isn't maybe necessarily totally obvious. We might have to rethink our code a little bit. Okay. So what if we were to have just another variable? Let me use a better color here. This red isn't showing up super well. I'm going to keep all this right here, but let's say instead of going with this approach, that we just had a variable called output. And we started it out with, just an empty string. And then every time we had, if we had that scenario where we had if I, modulo 3 is 0, then we want to do output. We want to add fizz. And then if I modulo 5 is 0, then we want to output add buzz. And then we want to do the same thing, but if we're getting to 2, then we want to add Baz. So in this scenario, output could be something like fizz, buzz, Baz, depending on... Oh, go ahead.
If nothing gets added to it, it should put in the number.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so how would we check that?
You guys want to take a step? So I didn't. So if the output string stays empty after all of those if statements, what should you do? What does that mean?
So we're looking at this scenario.
Oh, if it's not divisible by any of those numbers. Yeah. So what you do?
Okay.
There's no if-else statements. Could you not check if output
Or yeah, so we set it right here to be, just an empty string. So if we're checking if our string is empty at the very end, then we can just add in, that would be the thing that we print or the thing that we add to our array, however we are doing our fizz buzz.
I'm sorry. Just have the output down here is automatically the number,
Yeah, here, let's
or is it not?
yeah, let's go over that in a little bit more detail. So output is just holding our like fizz, buzz, whatever, right? Right now, right here, it's holding nothing. It's holding a blank string. So if it's divisible by 3, then it's holding fizz. If it's divisible by 5, then we're adding on buzz. If it's divisible by 2, we're adding on baz. But if say we don't add on anything at all, then if we don't add on anything at all, then this never changed. This was still just a blank string to begin with. So what we can do is we can, like Brad was saying, we can just check to see if output, if this variable, if it still is equal to that, then it means that it never equaled any of these. And we can just say whatever it was at that moment. If it was 7, exactly. If it's 7, then we just print 7.
Yeah, but how would you write that if output equals 0 for,
So yeah, if output is equal to, then we can print, and this is assuming that we're looping through a bunch of numbers, so we would just print I, or we would print I like toString. Yeah. So basically, all this to say, like, you might be asked a question like this in the technical interview, and they will try their best to help you along with these kinds of questions. The issue, I think, is like being able to talk through what you're thinking the entire time and being able to like keep a dialogue going, making sure that you're not just like kind of sitting there being like, I don't really know. They might open up something, they might have you open up something like I found something like a CoderPad is kind of an industry standard. Let me pull that up. Okay, and there was a nice little try it out somewhere here. I should have had this already pulled up. Get a demo. Oh, that's not what I wanted. This totally does not look how I thought it did before. Here. It looks a lot like... It would basically look a lot like something like this, where they just have an interface where you can type in code and they can see that same code while you're typing it. So if I wanted to write like my for loop, for I, nope. If I wanted to write my for loop, something like that, like they are going to be able to see what you're writing. And one thing that you want to be able to do while you're writing this, especially if they don't have something like a whiteboard or something built in, is you want to be maybe writing notes to yourself, like as comments. So you'll be like, write out every time multiple of 3, something like that. Basically, you want to be communicating either verbally or through your code, or both, honestly, what you're wanting to do the entire time. Okay. So I have one other example. I don't know if we'll have quite the same amount of time to go through it. But we can take a crack at it if you want. It's inverting a binary tree. How do you all feel about that? Yeah, exactly. Okay. Maybe we don't get super into the technical, but how would you think about an example like this? Who wants to maybe just like talk about like some of the things that are going on in a problem like this? So I actually just copied this from LeetCode, but it is like it's kind of confusing. They don't really explain it. Basically, you want everything to be switched. So you see like the 2 is there, the 1 is there, the 3 is there. So like these are switched, these are switched, these are switched, like everything is switched.
I guess you say if it's on the left, move it to the right,
Okay.
go down, move whatever left to the right.
Okay. So how would you maybe go about, well, first of all, how would you think about like a binary tree in like something like Python, or how have you been learning it? Okay, like, so what is like the structure of a binary tree? Like, what would you have to do first? Right. Okay, yeah. So you would need a node. You would need like an outside structure. So this doesn't really talk about that specifically, but you would need like a root, and you would need, yeah, go ahead.
So are we changing the actual tree itself or creating an inverted tree and then returning that? So is it changing the original data or is it making a new tree that's the inversion of the original?
I think that in this case, I think that it wants the original, but I think that as long as your output is that, then it doesn't really matter. Like if this were, like I don't think, at least for the LeetCode question, I could double check, but in this case, it just, if your output is that, given this input, then you're probably fine. I don't think it matters too much, because I think the way that you would want to go about it would be to change the original. So, yeah. So if you wanted to switch, if you wanted to invert it, and you had this structure, you had the nodes, you're starting out with the root, and the root is going to be this node. What might you do first? Okay, yeah.
Traveling down to the right and switching.
Okay, yeah. Awesome. Yeah, so you could do, how would you make sure that you get every single one?
I guess you'd have to go all the way down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you might check this one, and then based on how your code is structured, you might just already be going all the way down until you reach what point? Okay, yeah. And what is the, how would you say that there's no more branching? What would be the children of like this node, for instance? Yeah, or if it's, yeah, it's null. Yeah, exactly. So once once you have like a root of null or of none, then you can stop. And so I can talk about this. I'll give it away a little bit, but like a very typical way of solving this is to just do a recursive function where you're just going down, you're calling each time to basically check each node, you switch them, and then you check the left and then the right node. And again, you're switching them each time. You're only stopping once you get to a null or a root node that doesn't exist. And because it's a recursive function, it's adding that to a call stack, and you can basically just like, it'll get to the end and it'll just go back up the call stack and want to go through all the other calls that you haven't done yet. And that ends up calling every single node on the tree.
It somehow keeps track of which level it's on, because you have to switch the 1 and the 3, and that's the second level or the third level.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got to keep track of all the levels.
Right. So if you call this one, it's gonna you'll call the left, and if you're calling the left and then the right, it'll basically get stuck. I say, calling the left one first, because that's the way your code will work recursively. And it'll go through all these first and switch them. And then once it gets to the bottom, it'll go back up and then do all the right ones. Not all the right ones, but it'll go to the right one and then check all those left and right. Basically just exhaust all the left ones until you get to the right ones. I mean, but yeah. I think that, what?
No, I'm just thinking it's amazing what computers can keep track of.
No, yeah, exactly. Any other questions on this? Why would you invert a binary tree? That's a good question. I would talk to someone in the systems spec about that. No, so that's honestly one of the criticisms, honestly, of these technical interview questions, is that a lot of times they can be pretty esoteric. They can be really just like, this is honestly a little puzzle that has nothing to do with your day-to-day job. I think the stated goal would be to weed out some of the people that, just don't really know anything about programming, but you kind of have to ride the right balance between, weeding out people who don't know anything and people who happen to know a whole lot about like all these specific frameworks and different things, but then, maybe they didn't know how to invert a binary tree. And, they didn't get the job at Google despite being an extremely talented engineer. So, there's trade-offs for this approach. There's a lot of criticisms, and I think rightfully so, but it's still better to be prepared for this kind of, this kind of format than to just, write it off entirely. I think that's all I have, though. That's all I have, except for all the extra faces that I had for this. Thank you so much.